George Washington was not just a founding general and president. He quietly became one of early America's most ambitious entrepreneurs, running one of the nation's largest whiskey distilleries and helping to launch a pioneering infrastructure company that tied regions together like an 18th-century startup founder. Welcome to the Celebrating America 250 podcast. This series is dedicated to the men and women who wore the uniform and then came home to build, invent, and lead in ways that reshaped our nation. Across these episodes, we honor veteran innovators from every era of American history. Warriors who became entrepreneurs, engineers, organizers, and visionaries, carrying the mindset of service into factories, farms, shipyards, laboratories, and boardrooms. In each story, we will trace a simple arc: where they came from, how they served, the moment they pivoted to civilian life, what they built, and the legacy they left behind for all of us. This is not just about dates and titles. It is about courage under pressure, resilience in transition, and the quiet, determined work of building a stronger country in peacetime. Did you know that by the year 1799, George Washington, yes, that George Washington, was one of the largest whiskey producers in the United States, running a distillery that pushed out nearly 11,000 gallons of whiskey in a single year? This is the same man we picture crossing the Delaware in a blizzard, now operating a diversified agricultural estate, a merchant gristmill, a fishery, and what we would today call a serious manufacturing operation. And that is just one part of the story. Before he became a symbol on our dollar bills, Washington was a young land surveyor, a frontier officer under fire, and later an infrastructure founder who helped launch the Potomac Company, an early American attempt to build a commercial superhighway of canals and river routes across the young nation. Today, we are going to follow his journey the way a veteran or entrepreneur would see it. From raw recruit to battlefield commander to builder of businesses that outlived him. His early life and background, George Washington's origin story, doesn't begin in a marble hall. It starts on the rough edges of colonial Virginia, where land, rivers, and risk went hand in hand. As a teenager, Washington trained as a land surveyor, trekking across the western frontier and learning to read terrain, rivers, and property lines with a level of precision that would later show up in both his military logistics and his business spreadsheets. If he'd had spreadsheets, this surveying work did more than pay the bills. It gave Washington an intimate understanding of the economic potential of the American landscape, where roads should go, which rivers could become commercial arteries, and which tracts of land were worth betting on. He also became involved in Western land speculation through the Ohio Company, joining a circle of Virginians, including family and political allies, who saw the Ohio Valley not just as wilderness, but as a future engine of commerce. So even before his name is known on the battlefield, Washington is already thinking like a strategist and investor, studying the map, understanding supply routes, and recognizing that whoever controls infrastructure controls opportunity. Leadership under pressure. By his early 20s, Washington is no longer just surveying land. He's fighting over it. At 21, Virginia's lieutenant governor sends Major Washington into the Ohio Valley with a message for the French: leave, or there will be consequences. The mission is brutal: snowstorms, rough terrain, hostile conditions, but he makes the 900-mile winter round trip and writes a detailed account of the journey that is published in both North America and Britain, turning him into an international name almost overnight. But fame comes with fire. In 1754, his first real combat at Jumonville Glen triggers a chain of events that helps spark the French and Indian War, part of the wider 7 Years' War between Britain and France. Shortly after, he suffers a humbling defeat and surrender at Fort Necessity, the only time in his career he would surrender in battle, and a moment that forces him to confront the cost of miscalculation. He does not quit. During the disastrous 1755 Braddock expedition, Washington rides into chaos as British troops are ambushed near the Monongahela River. With senior officers dead or wounded, he rallies the shattered force, has 2 horses shot from under him, and finds bullet holes in his coat, but keeps moving, helping save what's left of the army and cementing his reputation for cool leadership under fire. Over the course of the French and Indian War, he learns logistics the hard way: how to organize supply lines, fortifications, and personnel, how to deal with militia politics, and how to issue clear written orders that people can execute under pressure. These are not just military lessons. They are the building blocks of operational leadership, managing scarce resources, coordinating teams in remote environments, and making decisions when every option is bad, but doing nothing is worse. The pivot, carrying the mindset into civilian life. Fast forward through the American Revolution and Washington's service as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, years that refine his sense of national scale, logistics, and the hard math of sustaining a cause with limited resources. After the war, he does something many veterans will recognize. He stands at a pivot point. He could have held on to power or retreated into quiet retirement, but instead, he looks at the map of the new nation and sees a different battlefield, one defined by trade routes, economic fragmentation, and the risk that Western settlers might turn toward foreign powers for opportunity. In 1784, Washington travels again across the mountains to inspect his western lands and study the shortest routes between eastern rivers like the Potomac and the interior territories. To him, this is not just geography, it's strategy. If America doesn't connect its own regions, somebody else will. This is the core of his pivot. He takes the same mindset he used to coordinate campaigns and applies it to a new mission: building infrastructure and enterprises that will bind the country together economically, not just politically. In today's language, Washington is transitioning from uniform to founder, from commanding troops to mobilizing capital, partners, and technology. The entrepreneur, investor, and operator. Let's look at what Washington actually built once he carried that mission into civilian life. The Potomac Company, 18th century infrastructure startup. In 1785, Washington helps lead the creation of the Potomac Company, later called the Potomac Company, chartered by Virginia and Maryland to improve navigation on the Potomac River. The vision is bold: use a system of canals, locks, and roads to link the Potomac River to Western territories and eventually to the Ohio River, turning rivers into commercial highways that can move people, grain, and goods more efficiently across the young republic. He pushes for interstate cooperation between Virginia and Maryland, arguing that infrastructure is essential to both economic growth and national unity. This effort to coordinate states around commerce and navigation helps set the stage for further conversations on interstate trade that eventually feed into the Constitutional Convention. Operationally, the company struggles with engineering challenges and capital constraints. The canal system around Great Falls, for example, is difficult and only partially successful, but the project represents a major early attempt to marry public purpose with private enterprise in America. Washington's role here looks familiar to any modern founder or infrastructure leader. He scouts routes, builds coalitions, secures charters, and pushes a long-term vision that will outlive his direct control. Mount Vernon, a diversified, data-driven estate. Back at Mount Vernon, Washington is facing a different kind of crisis: soil exhaustion from tobacco, volatile markets, and the constraints of British mercantile policy before independence. He responds like an adaptive CEO. He transitions away from tobacco into wheat and other crops, builds a merchant grist mill to add value on site, and operates a commercial fishery on the Potomac, creating multiple revenue streams rather than relying on a single cash crop. Washington experiments constantly with crop rotations, soil management, and new techniques, keeping detailed records of outputs and efficiency. Today, we'd call this data-driven management: testing, measuring, and iterating rather than simply repeating what worked in the past. The whiskey distillery, scaling a frontier manufacturing operation. In the late 1790s, encouraged by his farm manager James Anderson, who had distilling experience, Washington builds a substantial whiskey distillery at Mount Vernon, using grain grown on the estate and leveraging his existing mill. Within just a few years, it becomes one of the largest distilleries in America. By 1799, Washington's distillery produces nearly 11,000 gallons of whiskey, generating significant profits and standing out as a major commercial operation in the region. This is vertical integration in action. He controls the land, the grain, the milling, the distilling, and the sale of the product. A full value chain that would look familiar to modern manufacturers and beverage companies. And crucially, he does not treat any of these ventures as isolated. The farm, the mill, the fishery, and the distillery all feed into one another, absorbing surplus grain, spreading risk, and maximizing the economic output of Mount Vernon as a whole. For veterans listening, there's a familiar pattern here. Identify the mission, understand the terrain, assemble the team, and then build systems that work under real-world constraints. How it changed lives, industry, and community. George Washington's legacy in business and infrastructure is easy to miss behind the glow of his military and political achievements, but it's deeply woven into how the United States grew. The Potomac Company's canals and navigation works were eventually absorbed into later projects like the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, and later still overshadowed by railroads. But the concept it embodied, that infrastructure investment is a national priority and that economic connectivity underpins political unity, became a defining theme in American development. At Mount Vernon, his approach to diversified agriculture, experimentation, and integrated operations foreshadowed many principles of modern agribusiness and manufacturing: vertical integration, risk management through diversification, and disciplined record-keeping. His distillery, once the largest in the country, stands today as a reconstructed site and an educational platform, reminding visitors that the first president was also a hands-on entrepreneur who understood how to turn resources into products people would actually buy. Washington also used his wealth and shares, including those in the Potomac Company, to support education, such as his provisions for a national university and the Alexandria Academy in his will, embedding public benefit into his private enterprise. For today's veterans and business builders, Washington's story sends a clear message. The same skills that win campaigns, resilience, logistics, strategic vision, and disciplined execution, can also build farms, factories, and infrastructure that change the trajectory of a nation.